November 9th, 1971. The day began like any other for the List family in Breeze Knoll, their 19-room mansion in Westfield, New Jersey. Adorned with a ballroom, marble fireplaces, and even a Tiffany skylight, the Lists' life exemplified the American dream. They were dedicated Lutherans, attending church every Sunday. Outwardly, their life seemed perfect. Yet beneath this facade, things were far from ideal. That morning, 46-year-old accountant John List sat down and ate breakfast with his wife Helen and his 3 children, 13-year-old Frederick, 15-year-old John Jr., and 16-year-old Patricia. As the children headed off to school, Helen poured herself a cup of coffee in the kitchen. John joined her, chatting casually with her before approaching her from behind. He then withdrew a 9mm automatic pistol, aimed at her head, and the bullet pierced the opposite wall as Helen slumped lifelessly to the floor, blood pooling around her head and seeping onto her slippers. John then carefully laid the body of his wife on a sleeping bag and dragged it into the grand ballroom beneath the Tiffany stained glass ceiling. Then he proceeded up to the 3rd floor, to his 84-year-old mother, Alma's apartment. Finding Alma preparing her breakfast, John kissed her on the cheek, dismissing her worries when she questioned him about the strange noises downstairs. He then aimed the gun at her left temple and, unable to move her body to the ballroom due to its weight, John covered her face with a towel, cleaned up some of the blood, and left her where she fell. Returning downstairs, he meticulously cleaned the kitchen. With the children still at school, John proceeded to write letters and make calls to his children's teachers, his employer, and other family acquaintances, stating that the family was departing urgently to see a sick relative in North Carolina. He dropped the letters off at the post office, arranged for milk and newspaper deliveries to the house to stop, and cashed out $2,000 in savings bonds belonging to his mother. Returning to Breeze Knoll, John made himself a sandwich and waited for his kids to return as he ate in the same kitchen he had just murdered his wife in. 16-year-old Patricia was the first to arrive home, after John was called to pick her up from school due to her feeling unwell. Once at home, John shot his daughter in the jaw, killing her before dragging her body into the ballroom and placing her beside her mother's corpse. Fred arrived home soon after, meeting the same fate at the hands of his father's pistol. John then attended John Jr.'s high school soccer game, cheering him on as if nothing unusual had happened at all that day. When the game finished, he drove his son home, walked into the kitchen with him, and shot him in the back of the head. But unlike the rest of the family, John Jr. did not instantly fall to the floor, resulting in John firing 9 more times at his son. According to John in a later interview, "I don't know whether it was only because he was still jerking that I wanted to make sure that he didn't suffer, or that it was sort of a way of relieving tension after having completed what I felt was my assignment for the day." Once dead, he moved his body to the ballroom to join the others. Then John recited a prayer from the Lutheran hymnal as he towered over the lifeless bodies of his family. Cleaning up the blood from the kitchen, John proceeded to cook and eat dinner, wash the dishes, and head to bed, later admitting it was the best night's sleep he'd had in years. Having massacred his entire family the following morning, he adjusted the air conditioning to preserve their bodies, switched on every light in the house, and put classical music on the radio, a ruse to deter potential intruders from entering the house. Sitting down at his desk, he composed a detailed 5-page confession to his pastor, believing he would understand the motive behind the killings. According to the letter, John feared his family would lose their faith in a world filled with evil and poverty, and murdering them would instead ensure their place in heaven. Then he meticulously removed every image of himself from every family photograph throughout the entire mansion to prevent its use in wanted posters by the police. John List then walked out the front door of Breeze Knoll, locked it behind him, and left. It would take over a month for the bodies of the List family to be discovered, and by that time John had completely vanished. That is, until nearly 2 decades later that an episode of America's Most Wanted led to a neighbor identifying the wanted fugitive in his new life as a married man living under a false identity. This is the story of family annihilator John List and how he was finally caught after years of evading law enforcement. John Emil List was born in Bay City, Michigan in 1925 to devout Lutherans John and Alma. His early years appeared ordinary, showing no signs of the tragedy he would eventually unleash. He graduated from Bay City Central High School in 1943 and followed in his father's footsteps by working as a Sunday school teacher before joining the U.S. Army during World War II, where he served as a laboratory technician. Sadly, John's father would pass away before the war had ended. After returning to civilian life, John pursued a higher education, earning a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's in accounting from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. But in 1950, with the outbreak of the Korean War, John was called back to active duty, leading him to meet his future wife, Helen Morris Taylor, at Fort Eustis in Virginia. Helen, a widow of an infantry officer killed in Korea, lived near the base with her daughter. According to John, there had always been tension between the two, stemming from Helen telling him she was pregnant soon after they began dating. As a devout Lutheran, John felt obligated to marry her, but after their wedding in 1951, Helen confessed to him that she had never actually been pregnant. Although John felt deceived by her lies, his religious convictions prevented him from considering a divorce. After completing his second tour in 1952, List embarked on a career at an accounting firm, and although Helen hadn't been pregnant before marriage, it wasn't long before she actually did fall pregnant. Before long, the List family had grown to include 3 children: Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick, and Helen's daughter from her previous marriage, Brenda, married and moved out. The rapid expansion of his family placed enormous pressure on John, and despite his diligent work ethic, he struggled to maintain steady employment. His quality of work was never questioned, but his interpersonal skills often led to conflicts with his bosses and colleagues, with many claiming there was something about him that they found subtly but persistently unsettling. When John secured a position as a vice president at a New Jersey bank, it appeared that their financial troubles were finally behind them. Helen insisted on purchasing her dream home, a grand 19-room Victorian mansion in the priciest part of town called Breeze Knoll. Despite their inability to really afford such an extravagant and luxurious home, John avoided confrontation with his wife by seeking a loan from his mother, Alma, to pay for it. Alma, who was said to dote on her only child, had a close relationship with John and was happy to lend him the necessary money. In return, she moved into a self-contained apartment on the mansion's 3rd floor. But within only a year, the situation quickly worsened for John when he was fired from the bank due to personality conflicts with the other staff members. Unable to face his family and admit failure, rather than tell them that he had lost his job, he began pretending to go to work. Every day, John would get dressed for work, drive to the train station, ride a few stops, get off and read newspapers, and then return home later on a different train. John was eventually able to find another job, but it paid significantly less, and it wasn't long before he lost that one as well. A cycle that repeated itself several times. Without enough income to cover the family's expenses, John began siphoning money from his mother's accounts without her knowledge to pay the mortgage. By 1971, John was practically bankrupt, creating a moral crisis for the devout Lutheran who believed that poverty itself was a sin and saw the concept of welfare as shameful. Alongside his financial problems, John was deeply troubled by what he saw as an increasing embrace of the sinful culture of 1970s America by his 3 teenage children. He was especially concerned about Patricia due to her aspirations to become an actress, an occupation John viewed as sordid and corrupt. There were even rumors she was experimenting with drugs and witchcraft, which deeply troubled and distressed him. And it wasn't just worries about his children and his bankruptcy that John was battling with. Shortly after their move to New Jersey, Helen had started experiencing blackouts and falls, and the vision in her right eye had started to fail. She had long struggled with alcoholism, but was starting to drink even more heavily, and even began to take tranquilizers to cope. Medical tests revealed that she had tertiary syphilis, which she had contracted from her first husband. Around the same time, Helen also stopped attending church with her husband, something John was extremely unhappy about. According to John, she had transformed from an attractive woman into a neglectful recluse, prone to public embarrassments about their intimate life, disparaging John's sexual abilities compared to her first husband. With all of these issues playing on John's mind, he contemplated taking his own life. But once again, his devout religious beliefs came into play, given suicide is viewed as the ultimate unforgivable sin. Refusing to allow himself and his family to fall into poverty or disgrace themselves by going on welfare, John came to a cold and calculated decision. To save his family, he was going to have to kill them. After murdering his family, John drove to John F. Kennedy International Airport, leaving his car there before taking a bus back to the city. From there, he traveled by train to Denver and applied for a Social Security card under the alias Robert Peter Clark. Finding work as a short-order cook, the family Annihilator embarked on a new chapter in his life. Apparently, his religious convictions didn't stop him from the ultimate sin of murder, and he was able to continue living normally as if he hadn't just massacred 5 innocent people. With each passing week, the lights in Breeze Knoll grew dimmer and dimmer, until they finally extinguished. Nothing but the haunting strains of classical music remained, echoing through the empty halls of the mansion. Due to the List family's reclusive nature, neighbors hadn't seen any cause for concern at first. But on December 7th, Edwin Iliano, who taught drama to Patricia, raised his worries about her absence to his colleague Barbara Sheridan, revealing that Patricia had once confessed to him a fear that her father might harm her and her family. The pair decided to head to the now dark house and investigate. Upon seeing two strangers lurking around the house, alarmed neighbors contacted the police, assuming they were trying to break in. It's worth pointing out, I've read this version of events from a handful of sources, but more commonly it's claimed that the neighbors simply called police for a welfare check on the house after weeks of no activity, and all the lights finally burning out. As I will discuss in the final chapter of this video, Iliano is an odd character, so if his presence at the house came from him as a source, it should be viewed as unreliable. Regardless, the police showed up at the house, with officers George Jelesnik and Charles Haller being the first to arrive at the scene. Knocking and peering through the windows, the officers initially found nothing amiss. But when neighbors informed them that the lights had previously remained on continuously, day and night, despite no sign of life, before they'd gone out, their concern began to grow. Locating an unlocked window, the two officers decided to enter the house and investigate. Inside, the house was shrouded in darkness, save for a single upstairs light that cast eerie shadows around the mansion. Creepy classical music permeated the otherwise cold, silent atmosphere in the house. Guided by their flashlights, the officers reached a set of curtains dividing the ballroom. As they drew them aside, an overwhelming stench of decomposing flesh struck them. In the ballroom, the bodies of Helen, Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr. lie purposefully arranged on sleeping bags beneath the stained glass ceiling. Further exploration of the house uncovered John's detailed confession letter and the firearms he had used in the murders. Following the instructions in the letter, they discovered Alma's body in her upstairs apartment. The revelation of such a heinous crime shook the quiet town of Westfield and quickly garnered national attention. With John's confession in hand, authorities instantly issued a nationwide APB for him. But with John having removed his image from all photographs of him in the house, police struggled to find a clear picture of him to circulate. They quickly located his car at the John F. Kennedy Airport, but found no record of him boarding a flight, which we already know he did not. The investigation quickly hit a dead end, with no leads as to where he had gone. As far as they could tell, John had vanished into thin air. Around a year later, a devastating fire engulfed Breeze Knoll, suspected to be the result of arson. As the wreckage was examined, the stained glass ceiling adorning the ballroom was discovered to be signed by Louis Comfort Tiffany and was valued at over $100,000, which is about $750,000 in today's money. This would have been enough to easily resolve John's financial troubles several times over. The cause of the fire was never determined, and a new house was eventually constructed on the site. Despite the new construction, the memory of the murders continued to haunt the residents of Westfield, and local children reportedly avoid walking past the property to this day. Over the years, law enforcement pursued every tip, sighting, and lead related to the case, but they were never able to locate John or achieve any breakthroughs even hinting at where he had gone. By 1989, the 18-year-old case was completely cold. But then, a relatively new television show at the time, America's Most Wanted, caught the attention of Captain Frank Maranka of the Union County Prosecutor's Office. Having previously failed to get the case on unsolved mysteries, Maranka believed it could be the ideal platform to revive interest in it, and maybe even get some tips to help them apprehend John. Because the case was so old and seemed so cold, executive producer of America's Most Wanted Michael Linder didn't feel it was worth covering unless they had an updated image of John List they could broadcast. Host of the show, John Walsh, known for his advocacy for victims' rights following the murder of his son Adam, was keen to bring John List to justice. So Walsh and his producers enlisted the help of forensic sculptor Frank Bender to create an updated image of what John might look like 18 years later. Bender, known for his work in facial reconstruction, collaborated with forensic psychologist Richard Walter to develop an age-progressed bust of John as he might appear in 1989. Drawing from facial measurements, psychological insights, and photographs of John's parents, Bender meticulously crafted a lifelike representation of him. Bender imagined List with a hawk-like nose, grizzled eyebrows, and horn-rimmed glasses. Psychologists suggested that List might still wear similar glasses to those he wore in his younger days, as a connection to his past successes. So he sourced a similar pair from a thrift store. With the new bust to present to its audience, America's Most Wanted featured the case on its May 21, 1989 episode. Watched by an estimated audience of 22 million viewers, the episode led to a number of tips. Police detectives manned the phones as nearly 250 calls flooded in, including several promising leads. One of these tips came from Wanda Flannery and her daughter Eva Mitchell in Denver. Even before the bust had been unveiled, the true crime enthusiasts were suspicious that their former neighbor, Robert Bob Clark, could be John List. Like John, Bob was soft-spoken, always wore a suit, was an accountant, and was a devout Lutheran. So when they saw Bender's sculpture on their screen, which had an uncanny resemblance to their previous neighbor, they immediately contacted the tip line. A mere 11 days later, FBI agents arrived at the door of Bob Clark's current home in Richmond, Virginia to investigate the lead. The door was answered by Dolores, Clark's wife, who informed them that her husband was at work. The agents promptly headed over to Clark's office and, just like Wanda and Eva, couldn't help but see the almost perfect resemblance between Clark and the sculpture of John List. Confirming this man was Bob Clark, they quickly asked him if his real name was John List, which he vehemently denied. Despite his denial, it didn't take long to fingerprint Clark and match his prints to those of John List, which were on file from an application for a handgun permit and his time in the Army. John was then arrested and charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder. With John now in custody, the years between the murders and his capture began to unfold through interviews and investigative efforts, revealing his whereabouts during the nearly 18 years he remained at large. Following the 1971 murders, John journeyed from New Jersey to Michigan and subsequently settled in Colorado. By early 1972, he established himself in Denver under the alias Bob Clark, adopting the identity of a college classmate. The real Bob Clark later stated he had no recollection of John and was uncertain if they had ever even met. Under the guise of Bob Clark, John secured an accounting position and eventually became the controller at a paper box manufacturer outside Denver by 1979. He integrated into the local Lutheran community, organizing a carpool for church members who were shut-ins. After meeting Dolores Miller, an Army clerk at a church event, John married her in 1985, and in February 1988, the couple relocated to Virginia, where he worked at a small accounting firm until his arrest in 1989, marking the end of his life on the run. On April 2, 1990, John List's murder trial began. After court evaluations diagnosed John with obsessive-compulsive disorder, the defense unsuccessfully tried to reduce the charge to second-degree murder. John's defense attorneys argued that he was suffering from PTSD due to his service in World War II and Korea. Expert psychologists also suggested that he was experiencing a midlife crisis at the time of the murders. However, the prosecution emphasized that these factors did not justify the murder of 5 innocent individuals. John's defense team also tried to introduce details about his daughter Patricia's involvement in witchcraft and how it played a role in John's decision to murder his family. But this was not allowed by the court. I'll get back to this detail shortly. There were audible gasps throughout the court as the disturbing 5-page confession letter, which had not been disclosed until now, was read out for all to hear. After only 9 hours of deliberations on April 11th, the jury rendered a verdict of guilty on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. John denied direct responsibility, attributing the crimes to his mental state at the time, and appealing for forgiveness and understanding. The judge, unmoved by his pleas, stated that he had no remorse or honor and sentenced John to the maximum punishment that was available to him. 5 consecutive life terms, leading to an eruption of applause from the courtroom. Walsh, however, argued that John should receive the death penalty for his disturbing crimes. If it hadn't been for Bender's remarkably accurate forensic bust, it's possible John would never have been caught and identified. Sadly, Bender passed away in 2011 from mesothelioma. John attempted to appeal the verdict, with his defense continuing to argue his PTSD from his years in the military should be taken into account, but the federal appeals court dismissed his attempts. Similarly, he claimed his confession letter left at the crime scene should not have been used as evidence, as it was written solely for his pastor. Obviously, the courts dismissed his argument. In 1972, John was briefly considered as a suspect in the notorious D.B. Cooper plane hijacking, due to the time of his vanishing aligning closely with the event, as well as him resembling the physical description of the unknown assailant. John denied any involvement in the case when questioned by the FBI, and with no evidence linking him to the case, he is no longer seen as a suspect by them. In a 2002 interview with Connie Chung, John finally expressed remorse for his actions, stating, "I wish I had never done what I did. I've regretted my action and prayed for forgiveness ever since." When asked why he hadn't taken his own life after killing his family to join them in the afterlife immediately, John said, "It was my belief that if you kill yourself, you won't go to heaven. So eventually I got to the point where I felt that I could kill them. Hopefully they would go to heaven, and then maybe I would have a chance to later confess my sins to God and get forgiveness." On March 21, 2008, John passed away at the age of 82 due to complications from pneumonia while serving his sentence in prison. His death was reported by the New Jersey Star-Ledger, which dubbed him the Boogeyman of Westfield. John's crimes have inspired numerous documentaries, TV shows, and movies, most recently being the inspiration for the Netflix show The Watcher, in which a Lutheran accountant kills his family and leaves music playing in the house, orchestrating an alibi that delays the discovery of the bodies for weeks. Earlier, I mentioned the claim of John and his defense attorneys that his daughter, Patricia, was practicing witchcraft. Before we end our deep dive on this case, I just want to explore this a little bit as it's rarely covered in regards to this case, and we've mentioned it before in our exploration of the Jeanette De Palma case. Rumors were rampant at the time that Patricia dabbled in witchcraft and smoked weed, though some members of her drama club have implied she may have been involved in heavier drugs. Whether these claims by John and his lawyers were based on anything real is unknown. As covered in our discussion of the Jeanette De Palma case, a couple of months before the List case, there was another murder in New Jersey linked to Satanism and witchcraft. 20-year-old Patrick Michael Newell had his arms and legs bound behind his back before two of his friends threw him into a sandpit pond in Millville and watched him drown. These friends then told police that Newell belonged to a sect of Satan worshippers, and he had asked them to kill him in a satanic ritual as he needed to die violently to be put in charge of 40 leagues of demons. There was a prevailing belief at the time of the List murders that witches and Satanists were rife within the youth of New Jersey. In particular, a number of disturbing incidents were reported around the Watchung Reservation involving dead animals. In one incident, Union County Park Police supposedly stumbled upon a creepy scene of burning candles, a chilling bowl of blood, and dead pigeons with their necks snapped. Whether any of this is true or not, it raises two interesting questions. Given the belief in teenagers engaging in witchcraft and Satanism was strong around the time of the List murders, did John genuinely believe his daughter was involved in this, motivating him to save her soul by murdering her? Or by contrast, aware of these rumors and stories, did John make up details about his daughter's involvement in such occult activities as a means to justify his brutal crimes? Speaking of Patricia's drama club, remember Edwin Iliano, mentioned earlier as Patricia's drama teacher who may or may not have led to the discovery of the List family's bodies? Well, in 1991, Iliano wrote, directed, and starred as himself in an extremely low-budget movie called The Patricia List Story. It's an unsettling film, fiction or not, to say the least, especially as Iliano appears to claim it's a real first-hand account of his experience of the events. In it, Patricia is mentioned as taking drugs and being involved in witchcraft and satanic rites. There's a disturbing dynamic between the depiction of her and Iliano, including the reading of diary entries which talk about her having sex with him and going camping with him. Why on earth would you write into a script that you had sex with a young student, let alone one whose real name you're using and who was brutally murdered? The whole thing is extremely creepy and weird, and seems to depict a Lolita-style relationship between the 16-year-old and her drama teacher. Again, keep in mind her real drama teacher wrote, directed, and starred in this movie. He portrays Patricia as obsessed with him, but the evidence, namely this film, clearly shows that the obsession was in reality the other way around. Whether he really had an inappropriate relationship with her, or whether the events in the movie are simply his fantasies, who knows? But it's really weird and disturbing. I've included a link to it down below, and to be honest, I don't really know what to make of it. Iliano passed away in 2009, not long after John himself, so there's no chance of getting any answers from him. But on the linked YouTube upload of the movie, there are a number of other drama students of his school in the comment section discussing him and the whole situation, given many of them clearly found him creepy and suspected him of suspicious behaviors. It's an interesting element of the case, as we know for sure that Patricia was a student of his. Anyway, with that strange tangent, our exploration of the List family murder case comes to a close. Let me know your thoughts about this one down in the comment section below. And as always, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and check out some of my other true crime videos up on the channel. You have been watching The Mystery Abyss.